What exactly is a party game? What is a competitive game? And what is a casual game? These terms get used a lot when discussing certain video games, especially asymmetrical games like Dead by Daylight. The majority of the time, people tend to use these terms to defend their view of how a certain game should be balanced or played, without really truly considering what they actually mean. So in this video, we're going to take a look at what the difference is between a party game, a competitive game, a casual game, where they overlap with each other, and why understanding the difference between these games is so important for DBD's future. So let's start with the party game. This quite literally means a game that can be played at a party. That usually, not always, but usually, means the game is easy to understand and to play. In nerd terms, we would say that these games have a low skill floor. Now, typically these games are not well balanced. A lot of the time they rely completely on random chance, with minor ways to move the favorability of winning in one's direction. Even party games that do have a high skill ceiling rarely have to worry about being played well by a tryhard. Let's look at Twister, for example, a funny game that does require some level of physical skill to win. However, you generally don't have to worry about someone showing up to a party with 10,000 hours of Twister playtime who's learned to unhinge their joints in order to maximize their chances of winning. In general, although party games can get competitive, there's a social aspect to it, and it's cringe if a person gets too competitive and ruins the vibe of the party, right? The same is true of an online party game like Mario Party. If played with friends in a party setting, the same rules apply, with a lot of random elements included in the gameplay to help mitigate the competitive mindset from ruining the overall experience. The goal of a party game is to have fun in a social setting. Being a sore loser or caring too much about winning in a party game is atypical behavior and is generally frowned upon. So now let's jump over to the competitive game. The majority of time this is referring to an online multiplayer player versus player game. The goal of a competitive game is to win. Now, it is fun to win, so you could say the point of the game is still to have fun, but I'd argue that it isn't fun to lose consistently in a competitive game. You have to lose sometimes or else the game is boring, but losing too often will lead to frustration because you're not having fun. Now, this is where problems start arising within the competitive game, and a lot of game developers have not yet figured out how to handle these problems. For example, if Johnny Applesocks decides that after his 8-hour shift at work to come home to play DBD for some fun, gets absolutely destroyed by a 10,000 hour player, that's an extremely frustrating experience. Basically, why is this filthy sweat lord ruining the game by gatekeeping it with their tryhardism? So the developers on the balance team have to create a matchmaking system that ideally keeps these players separated from each other. Now, this is really important, so keep this in mind. Both of these players want the same thing. They want to win because it's a competitive game, it's not a party game, and it's not a casual game. So just because players are bad or less experienced does not somehow mean they get to declare that a game is casual. That's an entitled mindset, right? We'll get to what a casual game is soon, but first let's take a look at the hot solution in the gaming industry to this dilemma: skill-based matchmaking, a system that assigns a hidden matchmaking rating number to every player so that they match with evenly skilled opponents. Seems like the obvious solution to the problem, right? So what exactly is the issue? Well, I explained this in further detail in my recent video about SBMM here, but the simple answer is that it doesn't achieve the overall goal of making the competitive game fun. Like I showed in my previous video, not only does it lead to player frustration at the high skill levels, but even for low skill players as well. At high skill levels of play, it forces veteran players to adopt a very specific playstyle or meta in order to have a chance at winning. This leads to stress, frustration, and eventually boredom. Low skill players, on the other hand, are still being forced into stressful matches because SBMM is still prioritizing that perfect equal experience in skill balance. So, what developers do not seem to realize is that high skill players want to be able to express their skill, and being forced to play the same exact way as everyone else in order to win doesn't allow them to express their personal skill ceiling. So, the failure of skill based matchmaking is that it replaces creative balance ideas like my currency system that would prioritize skill expression and instead replaces skill expression with pure game knowledge on what offers the best advantage over what actually takes the most skill, leading to a situation where advantage trumps skill. Again, this violates the key principle of what makes a competitive game truly fun, which is winning. If the chances of winning become significantly higher by using advantage, that's conditioning the player base to worship meta over trying to improve as players, and that's a failed system at the top skill level. Alright, but what about low skilled players? At least in this system, they get to have some peace without all the sweat lords ruining their experience, right? No, even if the SPMM system worked perfectly, which at least in DBD's case, it clearly doesn't, low skilled players still want to win in a competitive game. And just because they don't have as much game knowledge as veteran players does not mean it's any less stressful trying to win extremely balanced matches against equally matched opponents. Those really intense close matches that require a player's full concentration where the slightest mistake costs them the match and they lose can be fun and even memorable to have occasionally, but having those matches every single time isn't memorable, and again, it's too stressful, leading to frustration and ultimately burnout. What low skilled players and even some high skilled players truly want is a casual game, not a competitive game. So, what the hell is a casual game, and how is it any different from a party game or a competitive game? Well, one thing you hear all the time is that a casual game isn't balanced. A casual game is chaotic and balance is for nerds. Think the OG Modern Warfare 2, where you slap on Army of One and Danger Close, which allowed for infinite grenade launcher rounds that just killed everything in an enormous radius with almost no skill. Stupid, inconsequential, unbalanced fun. The problem is, this logic doesn't apply to an asymmetrical game like Dead by Daylight, because one side's fun is at the direct cost of the other side. So in order for one side to swim, the other side must drown. In Modern Warfare 2, if someone was using a ridiculously overpowered loadout, you could swap to that same loadout and give it right back to them. But you cannot do that in an asymmetrical game. So there does have to be some semblance of balance. However, the primary point of a casual game, even an asymmetrical one, is to have fun. Winning is the secondary objective. This is done by making a fun-focused gameplay loop that's even fun when losing. Now, modern developers seem to have, in a lot of ways, given up on this as a possibility. In their minds, gamers are just too competitive and there's nothing they can really do about it. Yet I see this as a lazy and short-sighted answer. It is not easy to create a casual game, and not every game needs to be a casual game. But in DBD's case, it absolutely needs and deserves a casual game mode. There is no greater collection of horror icons anywhere in the entertainment world, and it's not fair at all that in order to experience it as a horror fan, you have to deal with a competitive gaming environment. Now, since Behavior is actively exploring this idea in DBD through monthly gameplay modifiers, aka new game modes, I have a lot of hope for the future of DBD from a casual perspective. As long as Behavior doesn't think that simply adding a casual game mode is an excuse to not improve the core issues with SPMM for the veteran players. So hopefully that's not what ends up happening. Now let's discuss the elements of how you make a casual game mode work in a competitive game like DBD. Allowing 50-hour players to play with 10,000-hour players and everyone still has an enjoyable experience? That's not easy to pull off. Anybody who claims that's easy has no idea what they're talking about. It's important to be realistic here. A lot of playtesting is required in any game mode. No matter how good something might seem on paper, does not mean that it translates well to a real gaming experience. So there are really simple ideas like prop hunt that are very casual and fun, but it leaves out a lot of what makes DBD DBD. I do believe that at some level, players are still looking for a similar yet more casual approach to the core gameplay loop in DBD. Now, one thing I have learned recently about casual game design is the more players there are, the easier it is for a game to be casual. And this is especially true for asymmetrical games. If you look at the 1v7 formula of Friday the 13th, it's way easier to make that gameplay loop casual than the 3v4 formula found in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. When you are dealing with smaller numbers, the gameplay becomes more controlled, less dynamic, and very tight. Whereas when there's more players, that casual chaotic fun is able to shine brighter and more organically. So an example of this would be like a game mode where there's 8 survivors and only 1 killer, but the killer can mori the survivors on their first down. Something in that design direction is the recipe for the type of gameplay that becomes fun and unserious enough to the point where it's less about winning and more about enjoying the gameplay experience. Another really requested idea in the DBD community is the 2v8 game mode. Regardless, just trying to increase the player count in general is the best way for behavior to set themselves up for success. Also, one of the best ways to test a casual game mode idea is asking yourself if you would recommend it to the most casual gamer you know, or possibly even someone who doesn't generally play video games at all. If you think that person would have a chance to enjoy it, irrespective of their own skill level and the skill level of other players involved, then it's most likely an idea that has legs. Another thing often seen in the more successful casual games are rubber bands. If you're not familiar with this term, it's a design element that pulls players back when they get too far ahead and pushes them forward when they get too far behind. This is seen in more casual racing games like Road Rash. The person in first place is always being caught up to by everyone behind them, forcing a lot of player interaction and chaotic shenanigans. This is a design element that is sacrilegious in competitive games, but in casual games it helps preserve the spirit of the casual experience. In general, a casual game is taking the essence of what a party game is and then applying that to an online anonymous competitive ecosystem. That's why, again, anyone who says that's easy to do in a game like DBD has absolutely no idea what they're talking about. There's always going to be a lot of resistance. It's incredibly difficult to make players not take a game too seriously. Now, obviously, there are outliers. Some players are just lame and they're going to always take everything too seriously, no matter how casual it is. But attempting to say that DBD's core mode is a party game or a casual game, in my opinion, is not realistic at all. The truth is that Dead by Daylight is a competitive game with a huge casual audience who do deserve a way to play the game in a more casual setting. I think that's the most genuine way the game can be described. The last thing I want to mention in this video is that this upcoming Blood Moon event looks pretty sick. At the time of recording this, I have no clue what's going on, but I'm looking forward to trying it out. With that said, let me know what you believe is the best example of a casual online multiplayer game, and feel free to elaborate as much as you want on why. Also, as always, thanks for watching and have a good one.